The fluorescent lights of the university housing office buzzed overhead like angry wasps as I stood at the counter, my entire life packed into 3 suitcases and 2 cardboard boxes stacked precariously on a rolling cart behind me. The air conditioning was broken, of course it was, and sweat trickled down my back beneath my favorite blue button-down shirt. "I'm sorry, Mr. Chen, but there's been a mistake with your housing assignment," the student worker said, not looking particularly sorry at all. Her name tag read Brittany, and she had the exhausted look of someone who'd been dealing with housing crises all day. "Your original roommate withdrew from the program last week, and we've had to reassign you." I felt my stomach drop. Reassign me, but I specifically requested a single room. I paid extra for it. Brittany clicked through her computer, her acrylic nails making little tapping sounds against the keys. "Yes, I see that request here, but unfortunately we're over-enrolled this semester. Graduate housing is completely full. We've had to convert all singles to doubles." "So what does that mean for me?" "It means you'll be sharing a 2-bedroom apartment in the Riverside complex with another graduate student. You'll each have your own bedroom, but you'll share a kitchen, living room, and bathroom." She looked up at me with what might have been sympathy. "I know it's not ideal, but it's the best we can offer right now. You'll still be getting a partial refund for the difference in cost." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. This was not how I'd envisioned starting my master's program in architecture. After working for 3 years to save up money and get real-world experience, I'd finally made it to one of the top programs in the country. I'd pictured a quiet space where I could focus on my designs, work late into the night without disturbing anyone, and have complete control over my environment. "Who's my roommate?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why it mattered. A stranger was a stranger. More clicking. "His name is James Morrison. He's starting the MFA program in creative writing. He just confirmed his acceptance 2 weeks ago, so he was one of the last to secure housing." A writer? That could be worse, I supposed. At least writers were quiet, right? They just sat at their computers and typed, not like musicians or theater majors who might be rehearsing at all hours. "Fine," I said, because what choice did I have? Where do I go? Brittany printed out some paperwork and circled a building on a campus map. "Riverside Complex, Building C, Apartment 304, here are your keys. Your roommate moved in yesterday, so he should be there to let you in. If you have any issues, just call the housing office." 20 minutes later, I was dragging my cart across campus toward the Riverside Complex. The September afternoon was brutally hot, and I was beginning to regret not taking my dad up on his offer to help me move in. But I'd wanted to do this myself to prove I could handle this new chapter of my life independently. The Riverside Complex was actually nice, a set of modern buildings overlooking the river that ran through campus. Building C was the middle one, all glass and steel with balconies overlooking the water. I managed to wrestle my cart into the elevator and hit the button for the 3rd floor. Apartment 304 was at the end of the hallway. I stood outside the door for a moment, trying to collect myself. First impressions mattered. I wanted to come across as friendly but not too friendly, sociable but respectful of boundaries. I'd had roommates in undergrad, and I knew the delicate balance required to maintain a peaceful living situation. I knocked, then used my key when there was no answer. The door swung open to reveal a surprisingly spacious apartment. The living room was to the right, already furnished with a couch, coffee table, and a small TV stand. The kitchen was to the left, separated from the living area by a breakfast bar. Straight ahead was a short hallway with 3 doors, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom, I assumed. "Hello," I called out. No answer. Maybe James was out. That would actually be ideal. It would give me time to get settled before the awkward first meeting. I pulled my cart inside and headed down the hallway. One of the bedroom doors was closed and I could see light under it. The other was open, revealing an empty room with bare walls and a stripped mattress. That must be mine. I was about to start unloading when the closed door suddenly opened, and I found myself face to face with my new roommate. James Morrison was not what I expected. He was tall, maybe 6'2" to my 5'10", with dark hair that fell in messy waves past his ears, like he'd forgot to get it cut for a few months. He wore black-framed glasses that made him look intellectual and slightly intimidating, and he had at least 3 days' worth of stubble on his jaw. He was wearing a faded t-shirt from some band I didn't recognize and gray sweatpants, and he had the kind of lean, rangy build that suggested he'd been thin his whole life without trying. But it was his eyes that caught me, dark brown, almost black, with an intensity that made me feel like he was seeing more than I wanted to show. "You must be the roommate," he said. His voice was deeper than I expected, with a slight rasp that suggested he'd just woken up or had been talking for hours. "Andrew," I said, extending my hand. "Andrew Chen." He looked at my hand for a moment before shaking it. His grip was firm, his hand warm. "James, sorry, I was on a call with my advisor, didn't hear you knock." "No problem, I just got here." I gestured back toward my cart. "I'll try to be quiet while I unpack." "Don't worry about it, this isn't a library." He stepped back into his room, then paused in the doorway. "Just so you know, I tend to work late, like really late, 2, 3 in the morning sometimes. I'll try to keep it down, but if I'm being too loud, just let me know." "Sure, same here actually. Architecture deadlines can be brutal." He nodded, though he didn't smile. "Kitchen's fair game. I don't have a lot of food yet, but help yourself to whatever. There's a cleaning schedule on the fridge that housing left. We can figure out if that works or make our own." "Sounds good." Another nod, and then he disappeared back into his room, closing the door behind him. I stood there for a moment, processing. So James Morrison was intense, probably a night owl and not particularly chatty. That was fine. I could work with that. We didn't need to be best friends, we just needed to coexist peacefully for the next year or two. I spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking. My room was decent-sized, with a window that looked out over the river. I set up my desk under the window so I could look at the water while I worked, arranged my architecture books on the small shelf, and hung a few photographs on the wall: my family, my college friends, a shot of the San Francisco skyline that reminded me of home. By early evening, I was mostly settled. I ventured out to the kitchen to make dinner, trying to be as quiet as possible. James's door was still closed, though I could hear the faint clacking of a keyboard. He'd been right, he was working late already and it was barely 7 o'clock. I made pasta with the groceries I'd picked up on the way over and was just sitting down to eat when James's door opened. He emerged looking somehow more disheveled than before, his hair sticking up in places like he'd been running his hands through it. "There's extra if you want some," I offered, gesturing to the pot on the stove. He glanced at it, then shook his head. "Thanks, but I'm going to order something. I can't cook for shit." He pulled out his phone. "You like Thai food? I'm ordering from this place down the street. I can add something for you if you want." "I'm good, but thanks." He nodded and placed his order, then leaned against the counter while he waited. I felt him watching me and I tried not to fidget under his gaze. "So, architecture," he said finally. "What's your focus?" "Sustainable urban design. I want to work on affordable housing projects that are environmentally responsible." "Noble," he said it without irony, which was refreshing. "What brought you here, the program?" "The program, yeah, but also, I needed a change. I was working at a firm in San Francisco, but I felt like I was just making rich people's houses bigger. I wanted to do something that mattered." James studied me for a long moment, and I had the uncomfortable feeling that he was cataloging everything about me: my carefully pressed shirt, my neat hair, the way I'd arranged my apartment keys and wallet in a precise line on the counter. "What about you?" I asked, partly to fill the silence and partly because I was genuinely curious. "Why writing?" "Because I'm not qualified to do anything else." He said it like a joke, but there was an edge to it. "And because stories are the only way I know how to make sense of the world." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. "Food's here, I'll be in my room if you need anything." And just like that, he was gone, returning minutes later with a bag of Thai food and disappearing back into his cave. I finished my dinner alone, washed the dishes, and retreated to my own room. Through the wall, I could hear the faint sound of James typing, a irregular rhythm that somehow made its way into my dreams that night. The first week passed in an awkward dance of avoidance and overly polite interactions. James kept odd hours, just as he'd warned. I'd wake up at 7 to get ready for my morning classes and hear him still typing away. Sometimes I'd get up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and see the light under his door, hear the click-clack of his keyboard like a nocturnal insect. We'd cross paths in the kitchen occasionally. He'd grunt a greeting while making his third or fourth cup of coffee. I'd smile and offer some innocuous comment about the weather. He'd nod and disappear back into his room. It was civil, professional, exactly what roommates should be. But I couldn't stop thinking about him. It was frustrating, really. I hadn't come to graduate school to develop a crush on my straight roommate. I dated in San Francisco, nothing serious, just a few guys I'd met on apps, some fun nights that never quite turned into something more. I told myself that grad school would be different, that I'd focus on my work and maybe, if the right person came along, I'd pursue something meaningful. James Morrison was not the right person. He was my roommate, probably straight, definitely not interested, and I had no business noticing the way his hair fell over his glasses when he was concentrating, or how his long fingers wrapped around his coffee mug, or the rare smile that transformed his usually serious face. I threw myself into my coursework. The architecture program was everything I'd hoped for: challenging, inspiring, and all-consuming. My design studio met 3 times a week for 4 hours at a time, and we'd already started on our first major project, designing a community center for an underserved neighborhood in the city. I spent hours at my desk sketching and modeling, losing track of time as I worked through different iterations. The view of the river helped. There was something calming about watching the water flow past, unchanging and constant. It was Thursday evening when James knocked on my open door. I'd been so absorbed in my work that I jumped, nearly knocking over my coffee. "Sorry," he said, though he didn't look particularly sorry. "Didn't mean to scare you." "It's fine, what's up?" He shifted his weight, looking oddly uncomfortable. "So I have some people coming over tomorrow night, other MFA students. We're starting a writing workshop and we figured we'd rotate apartments. This week is mine." "That's cool," I said, meaning it. "How many people?" "5 or 6 probably. We'll be in the living room, might get a little loud with the feedback sessions." "No problem, I'll be in my room working anyway." I gestured at my desk, covered with sketches and models. "First big project deadline is Monday." He glanced at my work and I saw genuine interest flicker across his face. "These are really good." "Thanks," I felt absurdly pleased by the compliment. "It's for a community center design. The challenge is making it functional and beautiful on a limited budget." "Sounds like writing." He stepped closer, studying one of my sketches. "We have all these grand ideas, but we're constrained by form, structure, what's actually possible on the page." I never thought about it that way. "Art is art," he said with a shrug. "Different medium, same struggle." It was the longest conversation we'd had since I'd moved in, and I found myself wanting to continue it, to ask him about his writing, what he was working on, why he'd chosen this program. But before I could, he stepped back. "Anyway, just wanted to give you a heads up. We'll try not to be too disruptive." "I appreciate it." He left and I turned back to my work, but I found it hard to concentrate. My mind kept wandering to the conversation, to the way James had looked at my drawings with genuine appreciation, to the brief moment when his guard had seemed to come down. Friday night arrived, and with it, James's writing group. I heard them arrive, around 7 voices in the hallway, laughter, the rustle of bags and coats. I stayed in my room, door mostly closed, trying to focus on refining my designs. But I couldn't help overhearing snippets of conversation. Someone was reading their work, a short story about a woman who couldn't remember her own name. The prose was beautiful, haunting, and I found myself stopping my work to listen. After the reading, the group discussed the piece. They were thoughtful and honest, pointing out what worked and what didn't, offering suggestions with the kind of careful respect that comes from people who understand how vulnerable sharing your work can be. I heard James speak and I was struck by how different he sounded. His voice was still deep, still a little raspy, but there was a warmth to it I hadn't heard before, an enthusiasm when he talked about a particularly striking metaphor or a well-executed scene. The workshop went on for hours. Around 10, I emerged from my room to grab some water and found the living room full of people. James was sitting on the couch, his laptop open, gesturing as he explained something about narrative structure. There were 4 others, 2 women and 2 men, all around our age, all looking at James with the kind of attention that suggested he knew what he was talking about. "Andrew," James called when he saw me, "come here a second." I approached cautiously, aware that I was intruding on their space. "What's up?" "This is my roommate, Andrew," James told the group. "He's in the architecture program. Andrew, this is Melissa, Jordan, Priya, and Chen." We exchanged hellos and nice to meet yous. Melissa, a woman with short blonde hair and kind eyes, gestured to the chair next to her. "Join us for a bit, we're just taking a break." "I don't want to interrupt." "You're not," James said, and there was something in his tone that made it sound like he actually wanted me to stay. We could use a break from talking about our own neuroses. So I sat and found myself drawn into their conversation. They asked about architecture and I told them about my project. Priya, who wrote poetry, said she loved the idea of creating spaces that served communities. Jordan, who was working on a novel about gentrification, peppered me with questions about urban planning and affordable housing. And James sat back, watching the conversation with a small smile on his face, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. "We should head out," Melissa said eventually, checking her phone. "It's almost midnight and I have to teach a section at 9 tomorrow." There was a flurry of goodbyes, promises to send revisions, and plans for next week's meeting. I helped James clean up paper plates from pizza, empty beer bottles, cups with rings of wine at the bottom. "Your friends are nice," I said as I loaded the dishwasher. "They're good people, talented too." He wiped down the counter, then leaned against it. "Thanks for being cool about tonight." Of course, it sounded like it went well. It did. He paused, and I sensed he wanted to say something else. "You're welcome to join us anytime. I know it's not your thing, but the conversation's usually interesting." "I'd like that," I said and meant it. We stood there for a moment in the clean kitchen, the only sound the hum of the dishwasher. It felt like something had shifted between us, some invisible wall had been lowered just a bit. "Well, good night," James said finally. "Night." I went back to my room but found it hard to sleep. I kept thinking about the evening, about James's laughter, about the way he'd looked when he'd invited me to join his group, about the flutter in my chest that I was desperately trying to ignore. As September turned into October, James and I slowly began to develop an actual rapport. It started small, him asking if I wanted coffee when he made his morning pot, me checking if he needed anything when I made grocery runs. Then it evolved into longer conversations in the kitchen, discussions that ranged from the mundane, whose turn it was to clean the bathroom, to the philosophical, whether art had an obligation to be political. I learned that James was from Portland, that he'd been writing since he was a kid, that he'd spent 2 years after undergrad working dead-end jobs and writing in his spare time before finally applying to MFA programs. He'd gotten into several but chose this one because of a specific professor whose work he admired. He learned that I was from the Bay Area, that I'd known I wanted to be an architect since I was 12 and visited Fallingwater on a family trip, that I'd come out to my parents in college and it had gone surprisingly well, all things considered. That last revelation had slipped out during a late-night kitchen conversation. We'd both been working, me on a model, him on a story, and had emerged around midnight for snacks. Somehow we'd ended up talking about our families, and I'd mentioned my mom asking when I was going to bring a nice boy home to meet them. James had paused in the middle of making a sandwich and I'd felt my face flush. I hadn't meant to come out to him like that so casually, but now it was out there. "That's cool that they're supportive," he'd said after a moment, returning to his sandwich like nothing momentous had happened. "My parents are still pretending the whole queer thing is a phase I'll grow out of." I'd stared at him. "You're bi." He'd said it matter-of-factly, like he was telling me his shoe size. "Figured that out in high school, told my parents in college. They're not hostile about it, just sort of willfully ignorant. They ask about my friend when I mention dating a guy, that kind of thing." "I'm sorry, that must be frustrating." He'd shrugged. "It is what it is, at least they still talk to me." We'd talked more after that, sharing coming-out stories and dating disasters. It felt good being honest with him, and I was relieved to know that my attraction to him wasn't quite as hopeless as I'd thought. At least he liked men, though that didn't mean he'd be interested in me, his awkward architecture student roommate. The writing workshop became a regular Friday night event, and I started joining them for the social part, if not the actual workshopping. I'd bring out snacks, hang out during their breaks, and slowly became part of the group. They were all fascinating people, each with their own unique perspective and style. Melissa wrote literary fiction about family dynamics, Jordan was working on his social justice novel, Priya crafted poems that made me want to cry, and Chen was writing a genre-bending fantasy that incorporated Chinese mythology. And James was working on a novel about a young man trying to find his place in a world that seemed determined to keep him small. I'd only heard excerpts, but his prose was beautiful and brutal, full of sharp observations and moments of surprising tenderness. "You're really talented," I told him one night after everyone had left. We were cleaning up again, a ritual that had become comfortable. "Thanks," he looked embarrassed by the compliment. "It's still rough, lots of work to do." "Can I ask what it's about, like the overall story?" He was quiet for a moment, scrubbing at a stain on the counter. "It's about a guy who spent his whole life being what other people wanted him to be, and then something happens. I'm still working out what that forces him to figure out who he actually is. It's about identity, I guess, about claiming yourself when everyone else has already decided who you should be." "That sounds personal." "All writing is personal even when it's fiction." He looked at me then, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. "What about you? Is your architecture personal?" "I think so. I mean, I'm designing buildings, not writing about my feelings, but yeah. I think about who's going to use these spaces, how they'll move through them, what kind of life they'll have there. That's personal in its own way." "That's why you want to do affordable housing." "Yeah, I grew up comfortable, my parents did well, but I saw other neighborhoods, other kids who didn't have the same opportunities. And I kept thinking, what if everyone had access to beautiful, functional spaces? What if good design wasn't just for rich people?" James smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "You're kind of an idealist, aren't you?" "Is that bad?" "No, it's refreshing, actually. Most people I know have had that beaten out of them." "What about you? Are you an idealist?" "I want to be," he said quietly. "I'm working on it." The first time I realized my feelings for James had moved beyond a manageable crush was on a rainy Tuesday in late October. I'd had a brutal day, a critique session where my professor had torn apart my community center design, pointing out flaws I hadn't seen and questioning decisions I'd thought were sound. I'd held it together in class, nodding and taking notes, but by the time I got back to the apartment, I felt hollowed out. I went straight to my room, closed the door, and sat at my desk, staring at my sketches without really seeing them. I knew my professor was right. The design had problems, significant ones, but it still stung having months of work dissected so clinically. There was a knock on my door. Andrew James's voice. "You okay?" "Fine," I called back, trying to sound normal. The door opened anyway. James stood there, concern evident on his face. "You don't sound fine. What happened?" "Just a bad critique, it's part of the process." He came in, uninvited, and sat on my bed. "Want to talk about it?" I shouldn't have. I should have kept my walls up, maintained the friendly but distant dynamic we'd established. But I was tired and discouraged, and James was looking at me with those dark eyes that seemed to see everything. So I told him about the critique, about my doubts, about the fear that maybe I wasn't good enough for this program, that I'd made a mistake leaving my job in San Francisco to pursue something I might not be capable of. James listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Can I see the designs?" he asked finally. I showed him, explaining my concept, walking him through my decisions. He asked questions, good ones, and gradually I found myself seeing the project with fresh eyes. He wasn't an architect, but he understood structure and flow, and his perspective helped me see where I'd gone wrong. "It's not unsalvageable," he said when I'd finished explaining. "You just need to rethink some of the core assumptions, but the bones are good, the idea is solid." "You really think so?" "I do, and for what it's worth, your professor probably went hard on you because they see potential. Bad teachers ignore weak work, good teachers push their best students." It was exactly what I needed to hear. I felt something loosen in my chest, the tight knot of anxiety unspooling. "Thank you," I said. "Really, I was spiraling." "I get it, I've been there." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "And Andrew, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Don't let one bad day make you forget that." After he left, I sat at my desk for a long time thinking about his words, about the kindness in his eyes, about how right it had felt to have him sit on my bed and talk me through my crisis. I was falling for him, not just attracted, not just crushing, falling in the deep, terrifying way that made everything else seem less important. It was a problem. The weather turned colder and Halloween arrived. Neither of us had plans. James said he was too old for parties and I'd never been much for costumes, so we ended up spending the evening in the apartment, working in companionable silence. Around 9, James emerged from his room with a bottle of whiskey. "Want a drink?" he offered. "I think we've earned it." We sat in the living room, sharing the bottle and watching terrible horror movies on TV. James was surprisingly funny when he'd had a few drinks, making sarcastic comments about the characters' poor decisions and the implausible plot twists. "No one in these movies has ever seen a horror movie," he said, gesturing at the screen where a woman was inexplicably walking toward a strange noise in the basement. "The rules are simple: don't split up, don't investigate suspicious sounds, and definitely don't say 'I'll be right back,' because you will not in fact be right back." I laughed, feeling warm and loose from the whiskey. What would you do in a horror movie situation? Run immediately, no hesitation. Everyone else can figure out their own shit. That's very pragmatic of you. I'm a pragmatist at heart, despite what my idealistic fiction might suggest. He poured us another drink. "What about you? Would you be the hero who saves everyone or the first one killed?" "I'd like to think I'd be helpful, but I'd probably be the one making practical suggestions that everyone ignores right before they die." "The architect of their demise," James said, and we both groaned at the terrible pun. The movie ended and another started, but we weren't really watching anymore. We'd migrated closer on the couch. And I was acutely aware of James's proximity, the way his shoulder almost touched mine, the way I could smell his shampoo when he turned his head. "Can I ask you something?" James said during a commercial break. "Sure. Are you seeing anyone?" The question surprised me. "No, I've been too busy with school." "Why?" He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Just curious. You never mentioned dating or anything." "I dated in San Francisco, but nothing serious. I guess I'm waiting for the right person." I took a sip of whiskey for courage. "What about you?" "No, I'm terrible at relationships. I get too absorbed in my work, forget to text back, cancel plans when I'm on a deadline. Most people don't find that particularly endearing." "Someone will," I said before I could think better of it. "Someone who understands that your work is important, who doesn't need constant attention." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I felt pinned by his gaze. "You think so?" "I know so." The moment stretched between us, charged with something I didn't dare name. James opened his mouth like he was going to say something, but then his phone buzzed. He checked it and sighed. "My advisor, she wants to meet tomorrow morning about my novel. I should probably get some sleep." He stood, steadying himself slightly. "Thanks for tonight, this was nice." "Yeah, it was." He headed to his room, then turned back. "Andrew, you're a good friend." Friend, the word hit me like cold water. Of course I was a friend. What else would I be? "You too," I managed. I sat in the living room for a while after he left, finishing my drink and trying to convince myself that friendship was enough, that I didn't need anything more. I wasn't very convincing. November arrived with the kind of cold that seeped into your bones. The trees along the river lost their leaves, and the campus took on a stark, beautiful quality that made me think of Andrew Wyeth paintings. My community center project was progressing. After James's pep talk, I'd torn apart my design and rebuilt it from the ground up, addressing the structural and functional issues my professor had identified. The second critique went much better, and I actually felt proud of what I was creating. James was deep in his novel, working longer hours than ever. I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning to use the bathroom and see his light on, hear the steady rhythm of typing. I worried about him, about how much coffee he was drinking, how little he seemed to be sleeping. But when I'd mention it, he'd just shrug and say he was fine, that this was how he worked. The Friday before Thanksgiving, James's writing group met for what would be their last session before the break. The mood was different this time. People were stressed about deadlines, anxious about going home for the holidays, exhausted from the semester. When Melissa read her piece, a story about a daughter caring for her aging mother, Priya actually cried. Jordan's feedback was unusually harsh and Melissa snapped back at him. The air grew tense. "Okay," James said, his voice cutting through the argument. "I think we all need to take a breath. We're tired, we're stressed, and we're taking it out on each other. That's not what this group is about." He was right, and everyone knew it. The tension deflated, apologies were exchanged, and the session ended early. After everyone left, James collapsed on the couch with a heavy sigh. "That was exhausting," he said. You handled it well. I sat next to him, leaving a respectful distance between us, very diplomatic. I don't feel diplomatic, I feel like I'm holding everything together with duct tape and prayers. He rubbed his face. Sorry, rough week. Want to talk about it? He was quiet for a long moment. My advisor wants me to completely rewrite the second act of my novel, says the packing is off and the character arc doesn't work. She's probably right, but it means months of work and I'm already behind where I wanted to be. That sounds frustrating. It is, and the worst part is I can't even be mad about it because I know she's right. I hate starting over. I hate feeling like I'm not good enough. You are good enough, I said firmly. Your writing is incredible, James. I've heard it. Everyone in your group thinks so too. One setback doesn't change that. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You always know what to say. I'm just being honest. I know that's what makes it matter. We sat in comfortable silence for a while and I felt the distance between us grow smaller, our shoulders touching now, our knees bumping together. It felt natural, easy, like we'd been doing this forever. Are you going home for Thanksgiving? James asked eventually. Yeah, flying out Wednesday morning. My mom would kill me if I missed it. What about you? I'm staying here. My parents are doing Thanksgiving with my sister's in-laws this year, and the thought of being stuck in a house full of strangers making small talk about my creative pursuits sounds like hell. You're going to be alone. It's fine, I'll use the time to work on my revisions. I frowned. That's depressing, James. It's practical. An idea formed in my head, probably a bad one, but I couldn't stop myself. Come home with me. He blinked. What? Come home with me for Thanksgiving. My family always does a big thing, tons of food, my aunts and uncles, my grandmother. It's chaotic, but it's fun. And you shouldn't spend the holiday alone in an empty apartment. Andrew, I can't just crash your family Thanksgiving. Why not? We always have random people. Last year my mom invited 3 of her coworkers who didn't have anywhere to go. She'd be thrilled to have you. I don't know. Please, I'd feel terrible leaving you here alone. I bumped my shoulder against his. Plus, my mom's cooking is incredible, best turkey you'll ever have. He smiled, a small thing but genuine. You're persistent. Is that a yes? Let me think about it. Fair enough. But I could see him softening, could see the part of him that didn't want to be alone winning out over the part that wanted to maintain his independent solitude. The next morning I woke to a text from James. Okay, I'll come with you for Thanksgiving, but I'm buying my own ticket. I grinned at my phone like an idiot. The flight to San Francisco was uneventful. James was quiet, staring out the window as we flew over the mountains and deserts between the Midwest and the West Coast. I snuck glances at him, wondering what he was thinking, whether he was regretting agreeing to come. My mom picked us up at the airport and I watched James transform. He turned on the charm, smiling, making conversation, complimenting her car. She was immediately taken with him. Andrew didn't tell me his roommate was so handsome, she said in Mandarin, thinking James couldn't understand. Mom, I hissed, mortified. James just grinned. The next 2 days were a whirlwind. My family welcomed James like he was one of their own. My grandmother kept trying to feed him, my dad talked his ear off about literature, my aunts interrogated him about his writing. And James handled it all with surprising grace, laughing at my uncle's terrible jokes and helping my mom in the kitchen despite his claimed inability to cook. On Thanksgiving night, after dinner, we escaped to my childhood bedroom. James looked around with interest at my old posters, my bookshelf full of architecture books, the photos on my wall. This is very you, he said, organized, thoughtful. Is that good or bad? It's perfect. He sat on my bed and I felt my heart race at the sight of him there in my private space. Thank you for inviting me, your family is wonderful. They love you. The feeling's mutual, he looked at me seriously. This has been one of the best Thanksgivings I've had in years, maybe ever. I'm glad you came. We stayed up late that night, talking about everything and nothing. At some point, we ended up lying side by side on my bed, our hands almost touching, and I thought about how easy it would be to close that gap, to lace my fingers with his. But I didn't, because I was afraid of ruining what we had, afraid of misreading the signs, afraid of losing him as a friend if I pushed for more. December arrived with final projects and end-of-semester stress. My community center design was due in 2 weeks, and I was working around the clock to perfect every detail. James was equally buried in his novel revisions, living on coffee and determination. We barely saw each other except in passing. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find him asleep at the kitchen table, his laptop still open, his glasses askew. I'd gently wake him and send him to bed, and he'd mumble thanks and stumble away. Other times he'd find me in the same state. And he'd do the same for me, a hand on my shoulder, a quiet "come on, you need sleep," and I'd let him guide me to my room. The Friday before finals week, James's writing group met for the last time before winter break. But this time, only Melissa and Priya showed up. Jordan was sick, and Chen had already left for winter break. "Should we reschedule?" Melissa asked. "No," James said, "let's still workshop. Andrew, you want to join us? We're short on people." "I'm not a writer," I protested. "You don't have to be, you just have to be a reader. Come on, we need a fresh perspective." So I joined them, and to my surprise, I found that I had useful things to say. My background in design helped me think about structure and flow, and my outsider perspective let me ask questions they hadn't considered. When it was James's turn to share, he read a new chapter from his novel, a scene where the protagonist finally stood up to someone who'd been controlling his life. The writing was raw and powerful, and when he finished, the room was silent. "That was beautiful," Priya said finally. "Genuinely beautiful, James." Melissa agreed, and then they looked at me. "Andrew, what did you think?" I chose my words carefully. "I think it's the best thing I've heard you write. It felt true, like you'd lived it." James met my eyes across the room, and something passed between us. Understanding, maybe recognition. After Melissa and Priya left, James and I cleaned up in our usual ritual. But the energy felt different tonight, charged, expectant. "Did you mean what you said?" James asked suddenly, "about it being the best thing I've written?" "Yes, absolutely." He moved closer, and my breath caught. "You know what I realized when I was writing that scene?" "What?" "I was thinking about you, about how you're always authentically yourself, even when it would be easier not to be. It inspired me." "James, I need to tell you something." He was very close now, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "These past few months living with you, getting to know you, it's been the best part of my year, maybe the best part of several years." My heart was pounding, for me too. "I've been trying to talk myself out of this. You're my roommate, my friend, and I don't want to ruin that. But I can't stop thinking about you, Andrew. I can't stop wanting to be near you, to make you laugh, to kiss me," I breathed. And he did. It was soft at first, tentative, his hand cupping my face as his lips met mine. But then I responded, pressing closer, and the kiss deepened. It felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff at the same time, terrifying and perfect and right. We broke apart, both breathing hard. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," James admitted. "Months," I corrected. "I've wanted that for months." He laughed, a sound of pure joy, and kissed me again. We didn't talk about what it meant, not that night. We just kissed until we were dizzy with it, until we couldn't keep our hands off each other, until James's alarm went off at 2 a.m. reminding him he had an advisor meeting in the morning. "I should sleep," he said reluctantly, his forehead pressed against mine. "You should." "I don't want to." "Me neither." But we separated, and I went to my room, and I lay awake for hours, replaying every moment, every touch, every breathless second. The next morning, I woke up convinced I'd dreamed it. But then I found James in the kitchen, and he looked at me with such warmth that I knew it was real. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning." We stood there, suddenly awkward, neither of us knowing how to navigate this new territory. "So," James said finally, "that happened." "It did." "I don't regret it, in case you were wondering." "I wasn't, but I'm glad to hear it anyway." He poured me coffee, and our fingers brushed when he handed me the mug. Such a small touch, but it sent electricity through me. "We should probably talk about this," James said, "about what we want." "What do you want?" He looked at me seriously. "I want to see where this goes, with you, if you want that too." "I do very much." "But we should take it slow," he added. We still live together, still have to maintain our living situation. I don't want things to get complicated. Agreed. It was a sensible conversation, mature and reasonable, but inside I was anything but sensible. I wanted to kiss him again, to explore this thing between us, to discover everything about him. We spent the day together, ostensibly working but mostly just existing in the same space, stealing glances, finding excuses to be near each other. That evening, James suggested we order Thai food, the same place he'd ordered from that first night, and watch a movie. We sat on the couch and gradually the distance between us closed. His arm went around my shoulders, my head found his chest, his hand tangled in my hair. The movie played, forgotten, as we kissed slowly, exploring each other with a patience that felt almost unbearable. James's hands were careful, reverent, like I was something precious he was afraid to break. "Is this okay?" he kept asking. "Yes, more than okay." We made out like teenagers and it was perfect. When we finally stopped, flushed and breathless, James pulled me closer. "I really like you, Andrew Chen." "I really like you too, James Morrison." That week was a blur of final stress and stolen moments. We'd take study breaks together, kissing in the kitchen, in the hallway, once pressed against the door of the bathroom. We couldn't keep our hands off each other, but we also maintained our boundaries, sleeping in our separate rooms, keeping things above the waist, taking it slow just like we'd agreed. My final project presentation went well. My professor praised the design's innovation and functionality, and I knew James's late-night pep talks had made the difference. James finished his revisions and submitted them to his advisor, exhausted but satisfied. And then winter break arrived, and we had to separate. "Come to Portland with me," James said the night before we were both leaving. "I can't, my parents are expecting me." "After Christmas then, come for New Year's, I want you to see where I'm from." "Okay," I agreed, even though meeting his parents terrified me. "I'll come." We kissed goodbye at the airport, and I felt the loss of him like a physical ache. Christmas with my family was wonderful but bittersweet. I missed James constantly, texted him throughout the day, fell asleep on the phone with him every night. "When are you going to tell us about your boyfriend?" my mom asked on Christmas Eve. I nearly choked on my tea. "What?" "Andrew, please, a mother knows you've been glowing since Thanksgiving, and you're on your phone constantly, so who is he?" I should have known I couldn't hide anything from her. "It's James, my roommate." Her face lit up. "The handsome writer." "Oh, Andrew, I'm so happy for you, he's wonderful." "We're taking it slow," I warned. "We just started, whatever this is." "That's smart, but I saw the way he looked at you at Thanksgiving. That boy is smitten." I flew to Portland on December 28th, nervous and excited. James picked me up at the airport, and the moment I saw him, everything else fell away. We kissed in the parking garage and I felt complete again. "Ready to meet the parents?" he asked. "Absolutely not. They'll love you, I promise." James's parents' house was a beautiful craftsman in a quiet neighborhood. His mother answered the door, a petite woman with James's dark eyes and a warm smile. "You must be Andrew, we've heard so much about you. Come in, come in." His father was tall and reserved but kind. They showed me to the guest room, pointedly separate from James's room, and his mother insisted on making me tea and cookies. Dinner was slightly awkward. James's parents were polite but careful, referring to me as James's friend and asking safe questions about my studies and family. But I could see them watching us, noticing the way James looked at me, the way we gravitated toward each other. After dinner, James and I escaped to his childhood bedroom. It was smaller than mine, filled with books and old posters of bands I didn't recognize. "I'm sorry about them," James said. "They're trying, but..." "It's okay, my parents weren't perfect at first either. They'll come around." "I hope so." He pulled me close. "Because I plan on keeping you around for a while." "Just a while." "A long while, a very long while." We spent the next few days exploring Portland, coffee shops and bookstores, the Japanese Garden, Powell's City of Books, where James got lost for hours. His parents gradually warmed to me, and by New Year's Eve his mother was hugging me goodbye and telling me to come back soon. We watched the fireworks from his parents' back deck, wrapped in blankets. James's arms around me. "Happy New Year," he whispered as midnight struck. "Happy New Year." We kissed under the stars, and I thought about how much had changed in just 4 months. I'd come to graduate school expecting to focus solely on my studies, and instead I'd found something I hadn't known I was looking for. January brought a new semester and new challenges. I was taking more advanced studios, working on increasingly complex projects. James was deep in his novel, pushing toward completion. But now we were together, really together. We told our friends, made it official, figured out how to balance relationship and roommate dynamics. It wasn't always easy. We had our first real fight in February over something stupid, dishes in the sink, or who forgot to buy milk, I can't even remember. But we worked through it, learning how to communicate, how to give each other space when needed. James's writing group figured it out before we told them. Finally, Melissa said when we confirmed it, "We've been placing bets on when you two would get together since October." "October?" I asked. "Please," Priya said. "The way you looked at each other during our first workshop, it was obvious." Valentine's Day arrived, and James surprised me with a handwritten story, a piece of flash fiction about two men who found each other in the least likely circumstances and built something beautiful together. I cried reading it. "It's us," I said. "It's us," he confirmed, "present and future." I gave him a set of architectural drawings, designs for a dream house I'd sketched in my spare time, incorporating everything I'd learned he loved. A writing room with huge windows, a cozy kitchen perfect for late-night conversations, a garden where he could think. "I can't believe you made this for me," he said, studying every detail. "I can't believe you wrote me a story. I'm a writer, it's what I do. And I'm an architect, this is what I do." We made love for the first time that night, slow and tender and perfect. Afterward, lying tangled together in James's bed, I felt a certainty I'd never felt before. "I love you," I said. James went still, then turned to face me. "Say that again." "I love you, James Morrison." "I love you too, Andrew Chen, I think I have for months." Spring arrived, and with it the brutal push toward end-of-year deadlines. My thesis project was consuming all my time, a complete redesign of an underserved neighborhood, incorporating affordable housing, green spaces, and community centers. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious, but James kept telling me I could do it. James was finishing his novel, writing and rewriting his final chapters. He was exhausted, running on fumes, but the work was incredible. His protagonist had finally found himself, claimed his identity, built the life he wanted. "It's done," James said one night in late April, staring at his laptop. "The novel, it's actually done." "How do you feel?" Terrified, relieved, proud, he looked at me. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being here, for believing in me, for helping me understand what I was trying to say." "You did all the work." "Maybe, but you made it possible." My thesis presentation was in early May. My entire committee would be there, along with some practitioners from the field. I was nervous, more nervous than I'd ever been. James came with me, sitting in the back row. Every time I looked up, he was there, solid and supportive, and it gave me courage. The presentation went perfectly. My committee praised the work, called it innovative and necessary. When it was over, James rushed up and hugged me, not caring who saw. "You were amazing," he said. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." We graduated in mid-May, me with my master's in architecture, James with his MFA in creative writing. Our families came, and there was a wonderful moment when all of them had dinner together, laughing and sharing stories, our worlds blending seamlessly. That night back in our apartment, James poured us whiskey. "To new beginnings," he said. "To new beginnings." We drank, and then James set down his glass and took my hand. "Andrew, I have something to ask you." My heart started pounding. "These past 9 months have been the best of my life. You make me better as a writer, as a person, as a human being navigating this weird world. And I know we're young and we have our whole lives ahead of us, but I also know that I don't want to do any of it without you." He pulled out a ring, simple, silver, perfect. "Will you marry me?" I was crying, laughing, nodding all at once. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring on my finger, and we kissed like it was the first time and the 1,000th time all at once. The house James and I built together sits on a hill overlooking the city. It's smaller than my original design, modified for practicality and budget, but it has everything we need: James's writing room with floor-to-ceiling windows, a kitchen where we make breakfast together every Sunday, a garden where we grow vegetables and herbs. James's novel was published 2 years ago. It was critically acclaimed, won several awards, and he's working on his second book now. I work at a nonprofit that develops affordable housing, designing spaces that serve communities, making the kind of difference I always dreamed of. We got married on a beach in Oregon, surrounded by family and friends. Melissa was James's best person and my college roommate was mine. James cried during his vows. I cried during mine. It was perfect. Life isn't always easy. We still fight sometimes, still struggle to balance work and relationships, still have moments of doubt and fear, but we face it together. I think about that first day, standing in the housing office, frustrated about losing my single room. I think about how reluctant I was to have a roommate, how I just wanted to be alone. And I think about how wrong I was. Because sharing a room with a stranger was the best thing that ever happened to me. It gave me James, it gave me love, it gave me a partner for all the adventures still to come. And I wouldn't change a single moment.